Hello, this is another Ipswich Vineyard Core Community Bible Study. This time we're going through the book of Hebrews. The current series are just topics that individual people in the group choose, so we're not unlike before where we did a chapter of the Gospel of John and went through it each week. This time each week we're just doing a different topic, so this week it's Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is a book in the New Testament. It has 13 chapters. The author is unknown. It was probably written to an audience of Jewish Christians. It's more in the form of a sermon rather than a letter, which is quite unusual for books of the New Testament. The audience of Christians are evidently undergoing a time of persecution and difficulty. That's referred to in the book, and the purpose of the book is to encourage them in their faith. It draws comparisons between the Old Testament and the New, between the Jewish religion of Abraham, Moses and David, and what has changed with the coming of Jesus. So I'm going to do a summary of the book, and then I'm going to look at some questions of interpretation and understanding the book, and finally some lessons that we can take away with us about the book. So here's a summary. Chapter 1 tells us Jesus is greater than the angels. Chapter 2 continues with the importance of Jesus and how Jesus becoming human allows us to be his brothers and sisters and become one with him. Chapter 3 tells us Jesus is greater than Moses. Chapter 4 tells us only through Jesus can we truly enter God's rest. Chapter 5 tells us Jesus is a king priest, superior to the Jewish priests. Chapter 6 encourages believers to move into deeper truths to maintain hope in God's promise. Chapter 7 looks at how Jesus, the king priest of the new covenant, is superior to the old priesthood and also superior to the old covenant and law. Chapter 8 continues with explaining how the new covenant has replaced the old covenant. Chapter 9 compares how the manner of worship under the new covenant is superior and replaces that of the old covenant. Chapter 10 explains how the sacrifice of Jesus is once and for all, and so replaces the daily repetitive sacrifices of the old covenant. Chapter 11 is the famous chapter on faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. There's the New International Version translation. The Passion Translation says, "Now faith brings our hopes into reality and becomes the foundation needed to acquire the things we long for. It is all the evidence required to prove what is still unseen." The chapter lists the heroes of faith in the Old Testament and includes some outside the Old Testament. Chapter 12 is encouragement to hold firm to the new faith. It speaks of difficulties and trials as opportunities for us to strengthen our faith. It speaks of the cloud of witnesses who are with us in the city of heaven. We have joined with them through our faith in Christ. And it says we have already come near to God in a totally different realm, the Zion realm, for we have entered the city of the living God, which is the new Jerusalem in heaven. We have joined the festal gathering of myriads of angels in their joyous celebration. That's Hebrews 12, 22b. And finally, chapter 13 is more encouragement to hold on to the faith, not to be taken in by false teachings, to love each other and trust in God. So I actually used the word covenant a lot there, which just is really another word for agreement or framework. The old covenant is a way of describing the way God interacted with people in the Old Testament, in particular Israel, and was primarily following the laws that God gave through Moses. And the new covenant is how things have changed, that Gentile Christians or Christians generally no longer need to obey the law given through Moses, but instead follow a different way of pleasing God. So that's that's the summary. Now, why did so much change? You see, Jesus in Matthew 5 verses 17 and 18 says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." So that's actually quite a strange thing to say, because it sounds like Jesus is saying his coming does not result in any sort of change to the law or the change to the old covenant. But that's clearly not what the message of Hebrews is about. Hebrews contrasts the new covenant and the old covenant and says that the old covenant is passing away. So how is that possible? Well, you notice that it says, I have not come to abolish but to fulfill them. And we need to kind of think of the old covenant as maybe like a loan or paying off a mortgage. If I promise to pay you £100 and I give you that £100, I fulfill that promise, then I no longer owe you £100 anymore. So Jesus fulfills the law in that it was like a type of promise which God through Christ fulfilled, and therefore once it's fulfilled, it's this is what he says, nothing will disappear until everything is accomplished. So clearly Christ's death and resurrection has accomplished what the law was required, basically. So the character of God remains the same. What he wants from us, love and trust and faith, remains the same. But note when it says about nothing will disappear from the law until all is accomplished, or until things are fulfilled, it's all or nothing. I mean, some Christians say, some of the Old Testament law still applies, like there's a moral part of the Old Testament law, or we need to keep the Ten Commandments, or there's certain things in the Old Testament law which remain, and certain things which, like a ceremonial, which pass away. But that's not what Jesus is saying in Matthew, and certainly not what appears to be being said in the book of Hebrews either. It's all or nothing. Nothing will disappear, or it's all gone. And what Hebrews makes clear, the book of Hebrews, is that there's been a change and the old covenant has gone, and there's like a new way of relating to God, a new framework for what God requires of people who follow him. Right, now one strange thing that right at the beginning, I said in chapter 1, it's about Jesus is greater than the angels, and there's a number of places in the New Testament where it says the law was given through angels. In Hebrews 2:2 it says, "For if the word spoken through angels proved unalterable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty." So the word spoken through angels is a reference to the law. Now, there's a number of other places. In Acts 7:38 it says, "This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness, together with the angel who was speaking to him, Moses, on Mount Sinai, and who was with our fathers." And then in Galatians 3:19 it says, "Why the law then? It was added because of transgressions, having been ordained through angels by the agency of a mediator." And then in Acts 7:53 it says, "You who received the law as ordained by angels, and yet did not keep it." Now, if you actually turn to something like Exodus 20 or read some of the law in the Old Testament, it doesn't sound like there's angels doing it. It says things like, "And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt." So some people have said, well, why does it say repeatedly in the New Testament the law was given through angels? Angel means messenger, but usually we have a certain image of what an angel is like. The way to understand it is by looking at a few other texts from the law. Now this is Exodus 23, 20 to 22. It says, "Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression. For my name is in him. But if you carefully obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. Now notice, when God is talking about, I will send an angel before you and, obey his voice and do all that I say, this sort of boundary between what the angel is saying and what God is saying, it seems very thin. At one point it can say, obey the voice of the angel, but the voice of the angel is also the voice of God. In Judges 2, chapter 2, verse 1, it says, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. Now here again, you see, you've got the angel of the Lord appearing, but when the angel speaks, it's God who speaks. So two last texts. Exodus 3, this is the burning bush. Now most people, if you said, like, what happened when Moses saw the burning bush, they'll say, oh, this was when God appeared to Moses. But if you read it, so Exodus 3 verses 1 to 5, now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames. So right at the beginning here it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer. God said, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this Moses hid his face, because he was afraid to look at God. So right here, the angel of the Lord appears to Moses, but almost immediately it then starts talking about the fact that it was God that was there. So the narrative switches very easily between the appearance of the angel and the voice of God. And last one I'm going to do is Judges 13, 19 to 22. Then Manoah took a young goat together with the grain offering and sacrificed it on a rock to the Lord. And the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. This is Samson's parents, by the way. As the flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. The angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell on their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah realized it was the angel of the Lord. We are doomed to die, he said to his wife. We have seen God. So a number of places it talks about the angel of the Lord and also God as being, kind of like two sides of the same coin, that when God appears, he never just appears, he always seems to appear as an angel, really, and in all of these sightings. So I think that kind of makes sense, that when the New Testament talks about the law was given through angels, it does seem to be the way in which God appears to people in the Old Testament. It's always in an angelic form, and the texts seem to go very easily between the angel being there and God being there, or the angel speaking and God speaking. It seems like they don't really strongly differentiate. So it basically just seems to mean that when God speaks or when God makes an appearance, it is in an angelic form, basically. Right, now I want to look at Jesus changes things. If you look at the whole system of the Old Covenant, you get dietary laws, what things that you're allowed to eat, like in kosher, not Jewish dietary laws don't allow them to eat shellfish or pork, that sort of thing. There's also laws of clothes. You can't wear clothes made of two types of cloth, I think. There's you can't sow a field with two types of seed. There's all sorts of, what crops you can plant, what is clean and unclean, what are holy days. There's rules on circumcision, there's rules on not eating with Gentiles, there's a complex system of sacrifices, there's the whole temple worship, where there's like a holy place and a most holy place, and there's a whole complicated religious system really built up around Jewish worship. And you can imagine how embedded that must have been for Jews. If you were brought up as a Jew, and you were taught from a young age, this is what God requires of you. You mustn't eat certain foods, you mustn't wear certain garments, and all sorts of do's and don'ts. Basically, a lot of do's and don'ts. So to then find that through Christ all of this is done away with, it must have been quite a difficult thing for them to really take on board, which is one of the reasons why I guess the book to the Hebrews is all about trying to explain how that has happened. So even if it wasn't necessary to not judge others who were not doing these things, it was definitely the way in which, if you saw somebody breaking the law, eating pork or something, it was a way in which you could sort of judge yourself, well, I don't do that, and what are they doing that for? But in Hebrews, over and over again, it's Jesus that replaces this law. Jesus is the true sacrifice. Jesus is the true temple. Jesus is the true lamb. So it kind of changes our understanding. It talks about the new Jerusalem in heaven, not the Jerusalem on earth, the temple in heaven, not the temple on earth. Jesus is the better sacrifice. So what it's doing is it's kind of replacing the visible with the invisible, which is why there's this chapter on why faith is so important, which is talking about the things that we can't see. And certainly for the Christians during the time of persecution, they needed to have reassurance really that their beliefs were not in vain. Why is Jesus greater than Moses? I mean, if you think about what Moses accomplished, which was the rescue of Israel from Egypt, and going across the desert, the receiving of the law, that's a big deal. All of the things he did. If you look at what Jesus did, he didn't rescue a whole nation from being slaves. Now, obviously, as Christians, we're going to say, what Jesus did was greater. But my point is, it's not visibly greater, really. What Jesus, if you look at the visible accomplishments of Jesus, it's not really comparable with Moses. In order to say Jesus is greater than Moses, you have to understand the spiritual significance of what he did, not the sort of physical, visible significance. So it's all the new covenant is about, is seeing through the eyes of faith. There's a writer called Witness Lee. He says when he has a piece of bread, he looks at it and he says, this is not the true bread. Jesus is the true bread. If he has a glass of wine, he might say, this is not the true wine. Jesus is the true wine. So there's a strong difference in the new covenant between what is visible and what is the ultimate reality, if you like. The ultimate reality is the invisible. So whatever our circumstances, our visible circumstances, whatever our visible difficulties and problems, Jesus changes things. So if Jesus applied to this set of rules and regulations, completely really turned them on their head. In the book of Acts, Peter, who's a Jew, is given a vision in which God says, take and eat, and before him is all of these foods that Jews weren't meant to eat, presumably like shellfish or pork or something like that. And Peter keeps saying, how can I do this? How can I do this? And God says, that he's made all these things clean now. So Peter is able to go and therefore eat with Gentiles, which is the next thing that happens. He's able to go to the house of a Gentile and eat with him, which Jews prior to that time wouldn't have been able to do. So the other point I was going to make was that came to mind when I was reading this is how the first shall be last and the last shall be first. The actual origin of the word Hebrew means to pass over, and the idea is that they're the ones who come from the other side of the river, and basically it's saying immigrant. So God chooses who are the people that God chooses. He doesn't choose, some mighty nation. He chooses immigrants. It's literally like saying the Hebrews or the immigrants will be my people. I'll put a link to the etymological explanation of it in the video. And so we think of the mighty acts of God, David defeating Goliath or Gideon defeating the Midianites, but what God really wants us to focus on is how he sides with the underdog and how he takes the side of the poor and the oppressed. God doesn't make his people from mighty nations. He doesn't choose Rome or Greece, Media, Persia, Egypt, Babylon. He chooses a group of immigrants, a nation of immigrants, and says they shall be my people, and I shall remain faithful to them no matter how unfaithful they are to me. So when we see Jesus coming as a suffering servant and yet ultimately triumphing over the might of Rome, and the early church through suffering and persecution still surviving and lasting longer than any political empire, there's a type of strength through weakness. God works through the fragile, the flawed, those with shortcomings and failings. The true miracle of our faith is not so much the high-profile healings or other miracles like water into wine or the calming of the storm, but that God works through our frailties when we trust in him and open ourselves to his plan and purpose for our lives. Thank you.